rock to fakie. This one's probably considered one of the more basic transition tricks, and it involves rolling straight up a ramp, lifting your front wheels up and over the coping and onto the deck, and then after stalling, you lift your front wheels back up and roll back in switch. Some things you should learn before this one are how to drop in. This is one of the first things you should learn on transition. So if you're not familiar with that one, I would suggest going and watching my how-to, and then coming back here. And the other thing you should know is just the fundamentals of how to ride up and down transition. Particularly, you want to be really comfortable going up and then riding back down switch, because in my opinion, rolling back in switch on this trick is probably the hardest part. So definitely be at least fairly comfortable with the basics of transition before trying this one. So the main parts to this trick are rolling up the side of the ramp, lifting up your front trucks and putting them over the coping and onto the deck. And then once you're in that board stall position, slightly lift your front trucks up again and then roll back in switch. For the foot positioning on this one, I like to have my feet pretty far apart. I like to have my back foot barely on the tail, just enough so I can lift up my front wheels. And my front foot is pretty much over the front bolts, maybe even a little further up. And this just gives you more stability once you're up on the deck in the stall position. So we're going to break this down into two different parts. The first just being getting your front wheels up and on top of the ramp. And then separately, we'll talk about coming back in switch. So the first thing I would start with is just kind of rolling back and forth, and little by little, getting your front wheels closer to the coping. Depending on the height of your ramp, this may take a little bit more effort or a little less. But either way, if you can get your wheels right up against the coping, then you should have a pretty good feeling of how much speed it will take to get your wheels to come up just a little bit further and over the coping. And if you're comfortable with this, something you can kind of start to practice is coming up the side of the ramp and then slightly kind of doing a manual so your front wheels come up, but you don't have to push them down over the coping yet. This is more to practice getting the feeling of having your front wheels come up off the ramp. And if this is already feeling kind of weird to you and maybe a little scary, I would suggest going and trying this motion on a straight bank. This way you can still kind of practice a similar motion and it's a lot less scary. So if you've gotten to the point where you can kind of roll up the edge and lift your front wheels, I'd say the next thing is to start kind of pushing them over the edge and onto the top deck of the ramp. And if you have any experience with kind of flying up and out of a ramp, then it can definitely help. It's kind of the same thing, just not going as fast. But essentially, you're just going to roll up the ramp, lift up your wheels a little bit, and then push them forward onto the ramp. But if you just do this motion with your feet, you'll probably end up leaning too far backwards. So what you really need to focus on is getting your body weight to shift forward over your front wheels. So at this point, basically all you should be doing is rolling up the ramp, putting your front wheels on top, and then you can just either jump off to the side or back down into the ramp. As long as you're getting comfortable getting those front wheels up and over and putting your weight forward, then you should be good. So now let's talk about the second part of this trick, which is coming back in switch. Like I mentioned before, this is probably the hardest part of the trick, and it can be a little sketchy because this is where you can experience getting hung up on the coping. Once again, I'm going to emphasize the fact that you should really be comfortable riding up and down transition. Rolling back into a ramp switch is definitely a weird feeling at first, but the more you do it, the more natural it feels. And also similar to the first half of this trick, I would say you can practice just kind of rolling in switch on a bank. You can kind of just pretend that it's a quarter pipe and then drop in switch a whole bunch of times until it feels natural. So personally, I think that there's kind of two ways you can go about this part of the trick. And the first way probably feels a little weird, but it would be to stand up on top of the deck and set your board down in the position it would be when you're in the stall. And then just going for it by pushing down on your front wheels, lifting your back trucks up and over the coping, and then rolling back in. But this might not be the ideal way to practice for you if you think it's kind of awkward feeling or scary. So I think that the next best way of doing it is just to sort of do the first half of the trick and little by little work your way up to getting your wheels more and more over the coping. You can pretty much do this trick by barely getting your wheels up and over, and then little by little you can shift your weight more and more forward until you're more up on the deck. Of course, coming in switch is still the biggest issue, but I've found that it's almost entirely a mental thing, because if you've gotten comfortable rolling up and down a ramp, then it's really pretty much the same feeling. The main things you want to be focusing on are where your body weight is. You don't want it too far back. And then also, as you're coming back in and lifting your wheels over the coping, you want to make sure you give enough clearance so you don't hang up. And I know all this is easier said than done, but it's really one of those tricks where you have to get a feel for it by just going for it and trying, and the confidence builds as you try it more and more. And at this point, I should probably say, if you're really scared to do this, then definitely be trying it on a smaller ramp. Something like a normal sized mini ramp, or even something smaller would be great. And if you're really not comfortable, then please wear a helmet and some pads. So ideally at this point, you've gotten comfortable at rolling up the ramp and getting your wheels up and over the coping. And then separately, you've practiced coming back in switch. And you can always go back to practicing this on a bank if you're not comfortable. And then you sort of just put everything together and muster up a little courage, and then hopefully you can put it all together. This is a really fun and basic trick, especially if you're just getting into skating transition. Skating ramps can feel completely different, especially if you're pretty new to it. And even though I'm pretty terrible at it, I still have a lot of fun doing it either way. So I would highly recommend at least trying this one out and seeing how it feels. I know that rolling back in switch is probably the scariest part, and I kind of cheated because I had to film this video switch because of the camera angle situation, so I was actually coming back in regular rather than switch. But I can indeed do these regular, so I know it's just a matter of doing it over and over and getting comfortable. So here are a few of my rock fakies. Just make sure that you get enough weight up and over onto your front wheels when you get them over the coping. Don't be leaning too far back as you go up the ramp. And take enough time to get comfortable riding switch down ramps so that when you come back in on this trick, it won't feel that weird. So go out there and give this one a whirl, and hopefully with enough practice and enough confidence, you'll be able to get it too. As always, I'd like to thank my lovely Patreon pledgers. And I'd like to thank you for watching, and you can like and subscribe if you want.